And greetings in Ukraine. I hope that we hear each other well.
Yes, I can hear you well. Can I be heard as well?
Yes, we hear you.
Okay.
In fact, I am really glad to have you at this conference because the lessons learned are very important. And of course, when we are talking about cyber attacks, lessons learned, especially on electroenergetic power system, this is really important, not just for the Ukraine, but also for the whole Europe. I am really excited to hear your presentation, and Viktor, please be our guest.
Totally agree with your assessment. It seemed that my beautiful country was a target on a number of occasions. And yes, power plant attacks were one of the most known and one of the most dangerous. Just a few words for the beginning about myself. My name is Viktor Drobotenko. I'm working currently in a private company, SK Security, providing all kinds of complex security-related services, starting from security audits and up to investigations, etc., etc. I'm also a proud member of ACES Ukraine chapter and Association for Corporate Security Professionals of Ukraine. As it was already said, Ukraine in the recent years, especially after year 2014, when the war was launched by the Russia against Ukraine, our country had become a target on a number of occasions. It's a pretty common fact that we are facing a modern hybrid warfare launched against our country, and cyber attacks are one of the aspects of that hybrid warfare. I'm glad to have this opportunity to share with you some experiences, because at the time of 2015 and 2016, when cyber attacks had happened, I was working as Chief of Cybersecurity Section in Ukrainian Cyber Police Department, and thanks to that post to have some interesting insights and first-hand information about the events. Can we move to the next slide, please? Yes, in order to understand the particular vulnerabilities of the electrical power grid systems, I will just say a few words how it is organized, because it's several levels. First, it's a generation level. It's a power plants where the electricity is generated. Then it is a transmission level. It's a high voltage transmission lines which are transporting the electricity from the place where it was generated to the place where it is distributed. And then it's a distribution level where it is getting distributed to the customers, and it's all kind of customers. It's residential, commercial, etc. In Ukrainian case, all levels are normally distributed by regions, and each out of 25 Ukrainian regions has its own energy company, which operates the transmission and distribution networks within its area of responsibility. It's because of historical reasons. Now we see a trend to enlargement of those companies, and some companies already covering several regions. But in 2015, most of the regions were separate companies, and that's important. I will tell a bit more about this during the presentation. So at every level, there are certain vulnerabilities. There are certain vulnerabilities at the power plant level and transmission level. And until the first attack in 2015, there was belief that distribution level, if it is vulnerable, it is not that critical to the resilience of the system as a whole. but the first attack actually showed it different. Can we move to the next slide? Yeah, next slide, please. Yeah. So as I said, there were two attacks, one in December of 2015 and another one the year after in December 2016. And both attacks, despite the pretty similar outcome, both attacks were very different in terms of execution and in terms of technology which was used to conduct those attacks. First attack happened on 23rd December 2015. Three different companies in three different regions had been attacked simultaneously. And there had been two different methods used in order to achieve the power shutdown. And the main idea was that attackers had gained control of the computer systems of all of those three different energy distribution companies, and they modified the firmware of the devices controlling the distribution level substations, which were not considered to be the critical element of the infrastructure. And at the same time, they also intercepted the control over the legitimate internal systems for the remote control of those substations. And despite the fact that all those three different energy companies had been owned by different owners, and they had different equipment installed and pretty much different management structures and different approach to the incident response, all three had been actually vulnerable and had been affected in a very similar way. And against all three, the attack method which was used by the cyber criminals had been very effective. And as insider, I may say that there have been other companies attacked as well, and some of their systems had been infected, but in other cases, in most other cases, the let's say SCADA, the industrial control systems which were used in the other regions, were not that much automated, and they were not giving enough possibility to execute attack successfully. So I tend to believe that if we would be better developed, we may have more damage and more serious disaster. But what happened in the terms of sequence of events, the initial infection of the computer systems of the energy companies was done through the infected by malicious macros board files, which had been sent to many addresses as a part of the phishing campaign. And one of the reasons why it was possible, because many contacts of the workers of those companies had been available publicly, and there had been lots of addresses publicly published for the contacts by the public, for the interaction with the public. Then the Black Energy Trojan was deployed after some of those email attachments had been clicked by the users, and some of the computers had been infected. Then there had been a pretty lengthy, several months, lateral movement of the attackers within the networks of the companies, where they had been discovering various resources and harvesting credentials of the legitimate users in order to get access to the internal VPN of the company and get access to the SCADA control systems and the networks where those systems are operated. As a part of this, also within this period, attackers had developed and deploy the malicious firmware for the circuit breaker devices at the distribution substations. And also they have been able to get control of the internal remote control systems. After they had prepared all those tools for the attack, they also break into the logic of the uninterruptible power supply controllers, and they also deployed to most of the operators' computers at the company's control centers, so-called kill disk software, which was intended to wipe all the hard drives of the computers placed at the company's control center. Then, when attack was about to begin, they also started distributed denial of service attack on the call centers of these companies. Those call centers had been all loaded with the thousands, never-ending phone calls generated by the program and originating somewhere in Russia. That's why the first information about the power goes down was significantly delayed and was arriving to the operators pretty late. But when the first signals arrived at the control centers that the power is out and they try to restore it remotely, they noticed that in many cases their computers are not anymore reporting, or that they had been observing physically on the screens of their computers that the mouse pointer was moving without any control from the operator's side. So somebody was actually controlling it remotely and manually going to the particular control systems and disabling. And attackers had been able to disable approximately 100 distribution stations across 3 different regions, mostly manually. Approximately 250,000 customers had been disconnected, and customers is not the equivalent to the people, it's equivalent to the enterprises, to the all kind of establishments, schools, etc., etc., etc. And that all happened in December, which is a pretty cold month in Ukraine. And the way the attack was designed suggests that it was designed to get a lasting damage for at least several days, if not more than that. But what actually happened, since the level of automation and plus due to the historical conditions, we did have in those 3 companies and pretty much all across the rest of Ukraine, we did have sufficient personnel and emergency procedures to restore power and overread the automated systems manually. So what practically happened in all those regions, the emergency teams had been instructed to go physically to each of those 100 distributed substations and re-enable power and then control it manually. And that actually happened. Thus, the blackout time was between 3 and 6 hours, depending on the region, and it didn't really cause any serious damage. I see there are questions appearing in the chat, but I will probably finish with the presentation in order to save time for other presenters, and then I will type my answers to all of those.
Please do later.
Yes. Next slide, please. So there had been investigation on the first attack. Certain lessons had been learned. It was widely populated within the cybersecurity community worldwide, and it was a very specific and very new word in the cyber warfare and the cyber crime world. So the year after, nearly exactly the year after, a few days difference, in December 2016, there was another attack also targeting the power distribution infrastructure. And the first attack was executed mostly manually and was targeting the distribution network substations. The second attack was very different. First, it was targeting the transmission level substations, and it was executed through the fully automated, very advanced, specifically designed for this case malware. It has a name given by different researchers in destroyer or crash overread malware. And the beauty in a quoted beauty of that malware, it had a modular structure and was allowing to upload different payloads depending on the particular infrastructure and particular SCADA systems which had been used, and depending on different protocols. We still don't know what was the initial attack vector. It is widely believed that it was also phishing or spear phishing emails, and there are certain facts confirming this version, but at the same time, there is no real trace of particular phishing email was recovered, and there is no 100% proof that it was in phishing or spear phishing. So there is possibility also, which was considered during investigation, that it was an insider's support in order to facilitate that attack. So again, the preparation started in this case also a few months before the actual attack happened in December. The attackers had spent quite some time harvesting all kinds of credentials and getting access to the various segments of the network. This time it was completely different energy company. That was an energy company based in the capital region of Ukraine and supplying energy to the capital of Ukraine. So in case when it affected much more customers than the first attack, despite that only one company was attacked. Again, this attack is very different, not only in terms of technology, but also in terms of intent. If first attack was intended only to disrupt power supply and wipe the hard drives of the computers in the company's control center, this particular attack and the software, the malware which was used in this attack, was aiming at physically destroying the elements of the power distribution system. The attacking malware had a component which was modifying the settings of the safety breaker, and it also had logic in order to logic aimed at overloading of the transformers at the transmission station, which in combination may result in the overloading, overheating, and then physical damage to the equipment. Again, we've been saved because of the existence of the possibility to manually overread the automated systems and manually trigger the safety switches, etc., etc., etc. Since it was less than a year after the previous attack, the reaction time was much faster, and within 1 hour the power supply was restored to the customers. And next slide, please. I believe you've seen this diagram many times during today, and you will see it more tomorrow. So we've been analyzing both those events and trying to generate the understanding on how attackers had been acting in order to identify the weak points in their logics and in order to generate good practices for the future prevention of such attacks. And I tend to believe that Ukraine is not the only place where it is possible, because our industrial control systems are not very much different than from anywhere else in the world. And so the capability and opportunity is still there, and it is only growing over the time when the capacity of cyber criminals is growing, and their knowledge about those systems and their vulnerabilities is growing. And intent, in this particular case, I tend to believe that intent was politically motivated, and it's actually an example of terrorism or cyber warfare. But there is no any reason to believe that it may not be a financially motivated attack, like disrupting power supply or disrupting any other industrial control systems, or gaining control of those systems in order to get ransom or to damage reputation or damage the operations of a particular company. I think it's only a question of time until we see something like this happening, and those kind of events are offered in the darknet by the cyber criminals as a matter of service, like the ransomware is sold at this moment at every dark forum. Next slide, please. So in order to better understand the logic behind the attackers' actions and to prepare the model which would help us to prevent and defend our systems, it's better to use the so-called cyber kill chain, specific for industrial control systems. And this cyber kill chain always consists of certain steps which attackers would have to do in order to achieve their objectives. And it starts with reconnaissance, targeting and delivery of the payload, getting command and control of the systems, act, etc., etc., etc. Most of those activities, can we switch to the next slide, please? Next slide, please. Hello? Do we still have connection? Oh, yeah, thank you. All those activities within cyber kill chain, activities which are performed by the attackers, are whether leaving traces and may be detected, or those activities may be prevented through this certain protective measures. Also, the results of any cyber attack would require a proper cyber incident response, and not only cyber incident response, because in case of attack on critical infrastructure, be it power supply or big chemical industry, enterprise, etc., would require a wider response plan, just to comparing to just the cyber incident response. Next slide, please. Speaking about particular lessons learned and opportunities, and specific to our case, to our situation, how we observed it, and what actually we see as a possibility to prevent similar cases in your country or anywhere else in the world. First of all, it's these kind of activities are requiring certain resources and requiring time and preparations. In our case, as I was saying before, that took several months for the attackers in order to to prepare intrusion into the corporate networks, to harvest credentials, to get access to particular systems, to gain required elevated and privileged access levels, etc., etc. Most of those actions have been leaving traces in the system logs, etc., etc. But it seemed that it wasn't monitored. So one of the lessons learned is that not only the traditional antivirus software should be delivered, but also the system activities should be monitored and analyzed in order to identify indicators of compromise and to be able to learn about the presence of malware in your systems as early as possible and prepare the disruptive actions which would prevent the attack or mitigate the possible negative consequences. The other thing, in both cases, we tend to believe that the lack of awareness of the users and the very low level of cyber hygiene within the employers of the organizations attacked had been a critical element for the successful initial deployment of the malware and for the success of the attack in general. So that's another very obvious but very effective way to improve the defense of the systems. Also, when the attack already happened, what appeared in our case that we've been able to prevent the major damage because of the availability of because the possibility was available to manually overread all those systems, which is probably not the case in Ukraine today, 5 years later, and which is probably not the case in many other countries, because the necessity to save budget and to make the systems more effective is pushing the management into the cutting the jobs and implementing more and more automation. That is why the proper planning for incident response is very important, and those possibilities to manually overread or switch to the backup systems which would not be affected by the attack is very important. Also, another interesting thing is related mostly to the cyber incident investigation and the way how this incident is communicated to the public and how effectively it is dealt with, it is investigated. Because what happened in Ukraine before, between the first news and the first official statement of the government, we had several months has passed. And everybody was afraid to tell something which would be politically sensitive. There was a huge discussion of how to call it: cyber attack, terrorism, or just a malfunction. There was no credible source of information. It appeared that we didn't have at the moment the national governmental or private coordination center for this kind of disasters. There was a lot of sources of information, mostly based on the rumors or the assessment of the secondary facts. But at the same time, as far as I know as insider, there was a very effective investigation. We had been involving the experts from overseas, from private organizations and from the American governmental structures at the very beginning of the incident, and we had much more knowledge as than it was actually then and later announced by the official governmental statements. And I tend to believe that proper communication, both within the responders circle and with the public, is one of the key elements in order to minimize the damage and ensure effective investigation. Also, it will help to prevent other attacks.
Viktor, sorry, we should slowly.
Yeah, I'll try to round up very quickly. Next slide, please. Yes, just very few words and I'm finished. So on the scale on this slide, it illustrates the different means of prevention and countering these kind of attacks. And it's very complex. It's not a job for one person, for cybersecurity expert, or just for the physical security expert. The main idea here and the main lesson from those attacks we had in Ukraine, that it is a very, when you are targeted by the very committed, very well organized aggressor with huge resources, they will use every opportunity possible, and they will have staged a multi-dimensional, multi-layered, complex, coordinated attack, which should be prevented at different levels, starting from physical security, gathering intelligence in advance, some preventive measures, awareness building, preparing proper architecture, establishing the security operations center, and planning for the good response after actually all other measures fail. So that's the main lesson, and I think that's where I finish my presentation in order to give floor to the next one.
Dear Viktor, thank you very much for these insights and, of course, lessons learned. This is probably the best way to learn from each other, because, as you said before, these attacks will be also in the future. So we should be prepared for this. I would like to ask you to stay with us and to answer some question in the chat file. And of course, once again, thank you very much for your presentation.
You're most welcome. Once again, thank you for invitation. I was glad to present at your conference, and if anybody needs my contact again, I think they can get it from you.
Thank you very much.